Hi, I'm Don. Today we're painting some Ewoks from Merlin models. In today's video, I'll show you the wrong way of painting big scale models. Also, at the latter part of the video, during our tip time, we'll talk about cracking when you're using speed paints. This is just a practice painting before I actually paint the resin casted statue by Merlin models. I'm super proud and happy to announce that I'm the official painter of this piece. Hi, I'm Don. Welcome to my studio. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. Also, this channel won't be possible without the support of my patrons. This 3D printed models is again just a practice piece. Basically, Merlin models sent me the files and I had it 3D printed. But I had to do a composition so that it's a little bit more fun to paint these models. I have a video already talking about big scale painting, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit more in this video. At the start of the video, I said I'll show you the wrong way of painting big scale miniatures. But actually, there is no wrong way of painting models. Although, you'll see at the end of the video that I kind of force my painting style, my miniature painting style, on this bigger vignette. So basically, the main difference of painting big-scale miniatures or models and miniatures is that as the model gets bigger, you don't really have to paint a lot of highlights and a lot of shades. You see, in miniature painting, because the models or the miniatures are so small, we have to make most of the elements of the miniature pop. And the best way to make your miniatures pop is to paint more highlights. By painting more highlights to your miniatures and adding more shades, it kinda gives your miniatures more definition and more volume, making the whole overall look of your miniature pop on the table or in the display cabinet. So the main objective of painting miniatures and making it look really good, or like the standard definition of good painting when it comes to miniatures, is if it pops really nicely on the table or in the display cabinet. Meaning you have to paint a lot of highlights, do really good definition in between the elements, paint a lot of shades, basically push the contrast so that you have a very defined miniature. However, for big scale models like this one is I think 1:90 or 1/16 scale. So the models is very big. You don't really need to paint a lot of highlights. In my opinion, once the scale is like roughly around 75mm or especially bigger like this one, 1:90 or 90mm or 100mm, as the model gets bigger, you don't really need to paint exaggerated highlights because the objective of your painting in most cases, in usual cases, is that you achieve very good realistic textures. Now, basically for miniatures, you want it to pop, but with bigger models, bigger scale models, you want it to look a little bit more realistic. You want your textures to represent real life. Now, in this video, you'll notice that I kind of force my miniature painting style, including the highlights, the atmospheric effects, and all that stuff, and even the shades. And it kinda look okay because it's a vignette, but if it's a standalone, it might actually look weird. So since this is just a practice painting project, I wanted to see how it will look like if I force my miniature painting style on this big scale vignette. And actually, I was very happy with the result. However, I have another vignette, an Ewok vignette, and I want to paint that piece like I'm painting fine scale. Like I will try to achieve the proper textures and not so much the lighting and highlights, but basically try to replicate the proper textures that would represent each of the element in the model. So after that next practice piece, I need to have I need to combine miniature painting style, which has a lot of contrast, a lot of colors, a lot of color depth, and of course highlighting, and combine it with actual fine scale painting, which tries to replicate the natural or the realistic textures of each of the element of the model. So that will be a bit of a challenge because I'm so used to painting miniatures for more than a couple of years now. So the challenge of painting finding the balance between miniature painting, the aesthetics of miniature painting, and the realistic aesthetics of fine scale painting would be, not that challenging, I think, but would be very exciting. Now, before we talk about the cracking, I received messages about getting a bit of really fine cracks when you're painting with speed paints after it dries. Before we talk about that, let's talk about speed paints when painting big scale models. This is actually my second model that I painted with speed paints. No, not my second model, but my second big scale model. Although unlike the first one, with this one, I kinda enjoyed the painting process a bit more because it, literally, the whole process flowed very smoothly. You see, speed paints, the main strength of speed paints is when you use it for models with very nice details, with very defined details, like this one. So the painting of the fur, because of the nice details in the fur, came out perfectly. Oh, don't tell me that dry brushing will also work as fine, because dry brushing, you kind of paint it horizontally, against the flow of the fur, and I don't like that look. So even though I enjoy dry brushing once in a while, I'm not really a big fan. So now we're finished, roughly finished, especially with the base colors with speed paints. It rendered so well on the cloth parts and of course the fur parts. Now I got a few messages talking about or asking about if I experience cracking when the speed paints dry on the model. To be honest, I have not. But because I think, as I've said in one of my previous videos, I think we have the perfect weather when it comes to painting. So you see, I live in the Philippines and it's hot, or at the very least warm and humid here. So I can't really relate to most people, especially my audience, which is primarily US people, and then UK, and then what's the third country? I think Germany and Italy, and then France. I can't relate to you guys because my weather is so different. I don't really have to shake my paints as much as you do. I also don't experience too much drying on the tips of my bottles, my paint bottles. And also I don't experience orange peeling as much or even cracking. So with this one, I kinda try to really force my painting to achieve the fine orange peeling that you get when you paint with speed paints. And I was successful. I applied a really thick coats in some of the back areas of this model, of this vignette. And I kind of forced it to dry by using a hair dryer. And voila, I produced some really fine orange peeling. There are two ways to achieve very bad orange peeling. One is that the paint underneath dries slower than the paint, or the paint type on top dries faster. So basically, especially when you painted with acrylics and you applied a lacquer varnish, the lacquer varnish cures faster than the acrylic. So the acrylic is still curing and it kind of moves around, the molecules of course moves around, and the lacquer on top kind of cracks. That is the classic orange peeling. With acrylics, if you're not using lockers, of course, and you shouldn't, like when you're painting with acrylics, this also happens with Citadel washes or Citadel shades. When you apply too much and you let pooling on the recesses, like really thick pooling on the recesses, the tendency is that the paint on top will dry faster than the very thick underlying layer. So while the paint on top is dried already and the paint underneath is still drying and moving, then you will produce some cracking, which looks super bad, especially if you apply the paint too thick. So you see, acrylic, especially if your weather is dry and it's kinda a hot day, that will happen to you because the top layer will dry faster than the layer underneath. It's actually easy to solve this problem, and it's better, much like sickness, it's better to avoid it though than to solve it once you see it on the model. The best way to avoid this cracking is to paint in two thin coats, a la Duncan Roads. By applying in two thin coats, you let the first layer dry first before you apply another thin coat. Now it's time for our usual tip time. Now before I reveal, a ton of thanks to all my patrons, because without my patrons, this channel won't be possible. Now here you could see the wrong way of painting big scale miniatures, because like I said, when you're painting big scale miniatures, the main objective is to try to replicate realism, because the model is big enough so that you could simulate stippling on the nose of the Ewoks and really replicate nice textures, realistic textures on the models. But you could see here in the finished painting, I kind of forced my miniature painting style on this big vignette. I painted more highlights than I normally would when painting big scale miniatures or models. And you could see that I kind of forced the main source of light is coming from my top right. And there's atmospheric painting here, which is not really done on big scale vignettes or models. Also, the shades are painted with dark blues and blue greens, which is very unusual when you're trying to achieve realism. So with this one, I kind of forced my miniature painting style on a bigger model, and it kind of turned out pretty good. But like I said earlier, my second Ewok vignette should be painted like fine scale, and my objective is to make it look realistic. Now going back to the cracking that you experience when you're painting with speed paints, basically you kinda painted it too thickly, and the drying of the top layer of the paint, the thick paint, dries faster than of course the drying of the bottom layer. Thus, since the top layer is dried already, it kinda cracks because there is movement at the underlying layer. The main way to avoid this is to paint in two thin coats like I said. You may or may not add a little bit of medium with these coats so that you have a little bit more transparency and your painting is not too saturated. So you may add a bit of speed paint medium for the first coat, let it dry for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and then you apply a second coat again with medium or without medium. It's really up to you depending on the saturation that you want to achieve. But basically, the objective of the second coat is to produce more contrast, meaning you can allow the second coat to settle on the recesses a little bit more than the first thin coat. Now, if you have really fine cracks, which I kinda achieve on the back areas or back part of this vignette, you basically just layer on top of it. The fine cracks happens on the recess areas of the model, and it's so easy to apply shades there by painting with whatever brand you want. You could use Citadel shades or even speed paints again, but basically you paint the recesses on top, Like if there's fine cracking, just paint over it and the new paint will kind of seep through the cracks and it will give you a nicer finish. However, I must say that I'm using cuttlefish colors for most of my layering. So I'm not really sure if I achieved cracking with my previous paintings, but I did not notice it with my previous videos. But with this one, I tried so hard and I achieved it. And it's kinda easy to resolve because you simply paint on top. And I tend to paint, I use cuttlefish colors, I paint more highlights, and I also paint more shades. Because I like my shades to have a bluish or purple tint to give it more color depth. So it doesn't really matter how you fix the cracking. You could also apply speed paints there with using darker shades if you want, or even the same color, and just paint with the brush, paint just on the recess areas. And this will kind of cover those minor cracking. And I'm pretty sure that one YouTuber will make a really big fuss about it and will have a really nice controversial like topic again for army painters speed paints. Anyways, I really enjoyed this painting and the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Do check out merlinmodels.com. That's it, Pansit. I hope you liked the video and watch these other videos.